Jesus' interactions with the Pharisees were frequent and often marked by tension, but they were also natural given the social and religious landscape of first-century Judea. The Pharisees were a dominant group among the Jewish religious elite, and their influence extended to daily life in matters of religious observance, moral conduct, and interpretation of the law. They often engaged with Jesus because his teachings and actions posed a challenge to their authority and interpretation of the Torah. The Pharisees were strict observers of Jewish law and traditions, believing that their adherence to the law was essential to maintaining the purity of Israel. They believed that through strict observance of the law, the Jewish people would be preserved, and perhaps God would send the Messiah to deliver them from Roman oppression. However, Jesus' teachings often diverged from their emphasis on legalism, focusing instead on mercy, justice, and the inner transformation of the heart. This difference in approach naturally led to many confrontations and discussions between Jesus and the Pharisees. The Pharisees came to speak with Jesus often for several reasons. The Pharisees, like other Jewish leaders, were curious and often wary of Jesus' growing influence. They saw him as a teacher and miracle worker who attracted large crowds, and they wanted to understand his teachings and test his authority. At times they posed questions to him, either sincerely or to trap him in theological arguments, as seen when they asked about paying taxes to Caesar or about the lawfulness of healing on the Sabbath. Jesus' popularity and his criticisms of their practices led the Pharisees to confront him. He openly rebuked their hypocrisy, calling out their focus on external rituals while neglecting the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. His parables and teachings often directly challenged the religious systems the Pharisees upheld, which naturally invited further engagement from them as they sought to defend their positions. The Pharisees prided themselves on their knowledge of the law, but Jesus interpreted the law in ways that were often at odds with their rigid understanding. He spoke about fulfilling the law by focusing on its underlying principles, love, mercy, and righteousness, rather than on strict legalism. His teachings on the Sabbath, ritual purity, and other Jewish practices placed the Pharisees in direct opposition to him. These disagreements often led them to engage Jesus in conversation or debate to challenge his teachings or undermine his credibility. Many of the interactions between Jesus and the Pharisees took place in public settings, such as synagogues or gatherings where Jesus was teaching. As influential figures in Jewish society, the Pharisees were often present in these spaces to observe, and their confrontations with Jesus became opportunities for them to either test him or try to discredit him in front of the people. In summary, Jesus' frequent encounters with the Pharisees arose from their contrasting views on religion, morality, and the interpretation of the law. The Pharisees, as religious leaders, were naturally drawn to confront someone like Jesus, whose teachings were challenging the established norms. Jesus, on the other hand, did not shy away from these encounters, using them as opportunities to reveal deeper spiritual truths, including his teaching that the kingdom of God is an inner reality, rather than something to be obtained through outward legalism or religious rituals. These interactions were both inevitable and central to the unfolding of his ministry. At one moment, while Jesus was speaking with the Pharisees, they posed a significant question. They wanted to know when the kingdom of God would come. This question reflected their deep-seated hopes and expectations, which were shaped by Jewish religious beliefs. The Pharisees, like many Jews of the time, were eagerly awaiting the arrival of God's kingdom. For them, this kingdom was not only a spiritual reality, but also a future event when God would deliver Israel from foreign oppression and restore it to political and spiritual sovereignty. Their question reveals a crucial misunderstanding about the nature of the kingdom of God. They were looking for external, observable signs, expecting something grand and visible, perhaps a divine intervention that would signal Israel's deliverance from Roman rule. But Jesus' response took them by surprise. He told them, "The kingdom of God does not come with observation, nor will they say, 'See here,' or 'See there.' For indeed the kingdom of God is within you." Luke 17:20-21. This response was radical. Jesus was telling them that the kingdom of God was not something to be observed in the way they anticipated. It was not a political event or an external revolution. Instead, the kingdom was something far more profound and inward. It was a spiritual reality that already existed within the hearts of those who embraced God's presence. In this conversation, Jesus was shifting their understanding from outward signs to inner transformation. The Pharisees had focused heavily on external religious practices and legalistic observances, but Jesus was teaching that the true kingdom of God begins within, through a transformation of the heart marked by love, mercy, and spiritual renewal. This was a message they struggled to grasp as it upended their expectations of how God would act and what the Messiah's role would be. The Pharisees' question and Jesus' answer encapsulated a central theme of his ministry. The kingdom of God is not confined to political or religious structures, it is present wherever people turn to God with sincere hearts. This moment was not only a confrontation of ideas, but also an invitation for the Pharisees to rethink their entire approach to faith and God's purpose. The kingdom of God does not come with observation, nor will they say, "See here," or "See there." For indeed, the kingdom of God is within you. NKJV. In this passage, Jesus is speaking directly to the Pharisees, urging them to understand that the kingdom of God is not an external, observable event. Instead, it is an inward reality residing in the hearts of people. The Pharisees were a dominant religious group in Judea during the time of Jesus, known for their strict adherence to the Mosaic law and their significant influence over religious and societal life. To truly grasp why Jesus engaged the Pharisees in these conversations, it's essential to explore who they were, the pressures they faced under Roman rule, and why Jesus sought to transform their perspective. The Pharisees emerged during a time when Jewish identity was under threat. Roman rule had imposed not only foreign laws and heavy taxation, but also the creeping influence of Greco-Roman culture on the Jewish way of life. The Pharisees believed that the survival and flourishing of their people depended on rigorous observance of Jewish law. They emphasized ritual purity, meticulous observance of the Sabbath and dietary laws, and they gained influence in synagogues, the heart of Jewish learning and worship. These were harsh times for the Jewish people, filled with oppression, Roman military presence, and puppet kings like Herod, who ruled with cruelty and subservience to the Roman Empire. For many Jews, including the Pharisees, hope rested on the expectation of a coming Messiah who would overthrow the Romans and restore Israel to its former glory. This Messiah would bring with him a visible, dramatic manifestation of God's kingdom on earth. Jesus' interactions with the Pharisees were often characterized by conflict, but he also engaged with them in meaningful conversation. In Luke chapter 17, verses 20-21, Jesus is speaking directly to the Pharisees about the kingdom of God, something they were keenly interested in. Like many Jews of the time, the Pharisees believed that God's kingdom would come through divine intervention, restoring Israel to political independence and bringing about the defeat of their oppressors. They expected the arrival of a Messiah, a divinely appointed leader who would usher in this new era. However, the Pharisees' vision of the kingdom of God was heavily tied to external, visible signs, whether through religious purity, strict observance of the law, or a political and military uprising. When they asked Jesus when the kingdom of God would come, they were likely expecting an answer that confirmed their expectations of a dramatic, observable event. Instead, Jesus told them something radically different. The kingdom of God does not come with observation, nor will they say, "See here," or "See there." For indeed, the kingdom of God is within you. This statement was a direct challenge to the Pharisees' understanding of the kingdom. Jesus was pointing out that the kingdom of God was not an external political event, but an inward spiritual reality. His message was that the presence of God and the transformation of the world began within each person, rather than through outward religious displays or political movements. The Pharisees were focused on the outward observance of the law, but Jesus emphasized the need for inner transformation. Jesus wanted the Pharisees to grasp that God's kingdom was not about external signs, laws, or political power. Instead, it was about an inner transformation, a personal relationship with God that would manifest in humility, love, and righteousness. This internalization of God's kingdom was a direct challenge to the Pharisees' focus on external religious observance. While they were preoccupied with meticulous rule-keeping and ritual purity, Jesus called them to a deeper spiritual life, one that began within the heart. Jesus' teaching that the kingdom of God is within marked a profound departure from the Pharisees' expectations. They anticipated external signs of God's reign, whether through strict adherence to religious law, elaborate rituals, or the rise of a Messiah to overthrow Roman oppression. Yet Jesus introduced a deeper truth. God's kingdom begins within, in the transformation of the heart. He emphasized humility, compassion, and love over the outward, surface-level observance of laws. This inner reality, Jesus taught, was the true nature of God's reign, shifting the focus from outward expressions to the profound internal change that leads to spiritual awakening. Jesus also made it clear that the kingdom of God transcended the rigid legalism the Pharisees often championed. While they meticulously followed the letter of the law, they often missed its spirit. In Matthew chapter 23, verse 23, Jesus condemns this approach, saying, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness." True righteousness, Jesus insisted, was not about rule-keeping, but about embodying the heart of God's commands, which centered on justice, mercy, and love. Jesus sought to open their eyes to a deeper understanding of divine truth, one that focused on the weightier matters of compassion and faith. Moreover, Jesus' vision of the Messiah's role diverged sharply from the Pharisees' expectations. Like many Jews of their time, they awaited a Messiah who would act as a political and military leader, liberating Israel from Roman rule. However, Jesus embodied a different kind of Messiah, a suffering servant who came to offer spiritual deliverance rather than political conquest. His mission was not to overthrow external enemies, but to bring internal victory over sin, brokenness, and separation from God. He called the Pharisees to see beyond their limited expectations and recognize the broader scope of God's redemptive plan. At the heart of Jesus' critique of the Pharisees was their spiritual blindness. In Matthew chapter 15, verse 14, he refers to them as blind guides, illustrating their failure to grasp the deeper truths of God's message. Though they were religious leaders, they were preoccupied with rules and appearances, missing the spiritual transformation that God was initiating. Jesus invited them to open their eyes, to move beyond the surface, and to embrace the new reality of God's kingdom unfolding in their midst. This blindness wasn't just about their lack of understanding, it was a deeper unwillingness to let go of their power and expectations to truly see what God was doing. Jesus' teaching that the kingdom of God is within carries a message for all people, transcending the immediate context of his conversations with the Pharisees. It serves as a reminder to all who are tempted to place their hope in external events, leaders, or rituals. The kingdom of God, Jesus reveals, is not a distant future event, but a present and ongoing reality accessible to anyone willing to turn inward and allow their heart to be transformed by God's presence. It is not tied to religious institutions, political movements, or grand revolutions. It is here now within each person who seeks it with a sincere heart. In conclusion, Jesus' interactions with the Pharisees offer a profound insight into his challenge to the religious and social norms of his time. By declaring that the kingdom of God is within, Jesus was urging them, and all people, to reconsider their assumptions about how God's reign would manifest. Rather than focusing on outward rituals and external signs, Jesus called for an inner transformation, an authentic relationship with God characterized by love, humility, and justice. Through this radical message, Jesus sought to reshape not just individual hearts, but the entire understanding of what it means to live in God's kingdom, inviting all to experience this divine reality in their lives.